there's a big element of public humiliation being posted online. They have a lasting impact, and it's used as entertainment. So everything looks like content to them. Like, how can I make this into content? And that, I think, has really amplified that dehumanizing element of it.
So they're trying, to really hurt and shame and humiliate the person. And again, it is sociopathic by definition.
Hello, and welcome to Awake at the Wheel. So in previous episodes, we've explored bullying and online bullying and the harms that can have with adolescents and young adults, and adults for that matter. But currently, there's a trend that's out there that's called the flip the camera trend. It kind of melds together in-person and online bullying in a whole new way. So we're going to watch a video just to frame it, and then we'll talk a bit more about it.
I just saw the trend of people flipping the camera on people. That's so rude. That was so mean. I can't believe people do that. That's so mean.
Why the would you want to literally put somebody else in a position where they're being made fun of? They're the butt of a joke that everybody is in on except for them.
Bullying isn't like this you see on TV. It isn't someone getting stuffed into a locker. It isn't someone tagging stuff into a toilet. Most of the bullying in real life is like this flip the camera trend.
We all know bullying isn't new, okay? That's a tale as old as time. Kids teased for wearing glasses, adults gossiped about at work. Cruelty is not a new phenomenon. It's just, it looks a little different from what we remember, and you can see it in the way people treat each other today. From strangers recording people at their worst without a second thought to so-called pranks that look more like public humiliation, it's like the world is getting a lot more comfortable with making other people uncomfortable.
Obviously, this is a problematic trend, but what I want to point out from the get-go is that it does encompass all of the same general principles, I guess we'll say, of traditional bullying. So it takes into consideration social hierarchy. It encompasses the bystander effect, which is individuals watching this happening and not interfering and not interjecting or defending the person being bullied. And not to mention the fact that there's a big element of public humiliation. But the difference here is that all of those things that happen in in-person interactions are now being posted online. They have a lasting impact, and it's used as entertainment. I think it's that additional layer of it being entertaining to others, which is what makes this especially problematic.
Yeah, and it dehumanizes the victim or the targets of this. And it makes the people who are dehumanizing them desensitized to this cruelty. And whether they're watching on a screen or they have the camera in front of them and they're recording it, there's something, this is, we've talked so many times about how irrational humans are. The crazy thing is, if someone has a camera and they're filming something that's happening, whether it's bullying, whether someone being humiliated, whether someone being attacked, physically assaulted, having that camera there, just in front of it, somehow makes the person feel that it's less real. Okay, because because it's on a screen, even if it's happening right in front of them. It's such a strange phenomenon. I mean, there's so many other strange phenomena that show that we're not rational, but it's that, again, that dehumanizing. And most importantly, the fact that it's bad enough when you're humiliated in front of two people, whether you're humiliated in front of a whole class. Now, that's bad enough. Now it's on the internet forever, and it follows you wherever you go. And I've said this so many times. In the old days, a kid, at least after school, if they could make it home from the school to home, they got some respite. They could relax. Yeah. They, recover and go back to that hell the next day. Now it's 24/7. And even if they don't turn on the screen, they're going to have some a-holes messaging them, sending them links. It's so hard to escape. And, and I'm so, I have a real, I'm very, let's say, as any good person would be, okay? I really have hated bullies all my life. I've stood up to them all the time, and not physically necessarily, but I found other ways to try to counter the bullies. I've always hated that, and so when I see this, it's one of my trigger points. So let's say, or pressure points.
Yeah, and I had adolescent client that I was working with, I think this was such an astute observation, and it ties into what you said previously as well. And I use this example often because I think it was such a great point that when people are viewing this as entertainment, they stop viewing people even in their real life as real people. So everything looks like content to them. Like, how can I make this into content? And that, I think, has really amplified that dehumanizing element of it.
Yeah, and and when I see these, the a-hole, influencers doing this stuff, accosting people on the street, it's I want them to get their comeuppance. I want them to be arrested. And I'll tell you right now, there was one video where these idiots were harassing this guy. I think it was at the airport or at the mall. I think it was maybe at the mall, and he took out a gun and he shot the guy. Right, because he kept saying "get away, get away," and he shot him. He legally had the gun. He shot him. He felt like threatened, and and the guy was found not guilty because he was being accosted. And the person who was assaulting him or accosting him, okay, his mother came on and she's basically defending her son. Now I can understand she's saying, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe this happened to my son," but afterwards she was defending him. And I'm pretty sure there was, if I'm not mistaken, that when people are asking, "Are you going to do this thing again?" I don't think he said nope. Okay, and we have others where these people are, taking it next step, which is, and I forget the guy's name. And again, I don't know why he's not in jail, but he was going into people's houses. Right, he went into strangers' houses, and sometimes a group of them. Okay, and they think it's funny, and enough people are watching, enough people are getting entertained by it that this is why the demand is the supply is because of the demand. And it's, again, rather than being arrested, spending serious time in jail, they might get arrested. Nothing happens to them. And so all these other fools, all these other, the blossoming psychopaths, now they may not literally be psychopaths, but certainly acting sociopathic, they think it's worth it. The punishment is certainly worth the rewards that they're going to get. If you get, and even the arrest adds notoriety in many cases, rather than the shame, and the public shame should be that we don't accept that type of behavior. Okay, and it's ridiculous. And by the way, a little side note here: I know there's nothing new. I've always found this ridiculous. And maybe somebody will say I'm too sensitive. And me, my background, I am the least sensitive person. And the most offensive stuff. Call me up. I don't want to say like I'm good with that. I got a very thick skin, but I never understood this idea that when you would watch people getting married, okay, and they're about to have a slice of the cake, and the person shoved the bride's face in the cake. I don't get it. And now there's all these videos where a little kid, like 3-year-old kids, having a birthday, and they're about to, they're blowing out the candles, and someone the parent or someone puts their head.
I've seen like fights break out. Like it's so bizarre, and it's like this desire to publicly humiliate.
Yeah, I mean. And again, and people are framing, it's just cute, it's whatever. Well, you can frame anything in any self-serving manner. The reality is, no, you've ruined it. And there was also these other videos where the parents would take an egg and they smack it on the kid's forehead, okay? And they were recording it, like, ha, 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 is that funny? Like, no, it's not funny. The kid doesn't know what's going on. You're just basically modeling for the kid, just reprehensible behavior. That's what you're doing. And by the way, a little side note here: when we used to watch TV, on commercials, there was one time where the trend was so many of these commercials, they had this really nasty element to it. Okay, it was just like, and it was for no good reason. It's just these people would just be like a-holes. Okay, and it was a commercial for like a Subway, like a submarine sandwich, or for a car insurance or something. Just really nasty. And I'd tell my daughters, I'd say, look what's going on here. I say they're selling this through some mean-spirited humor. I said, don't be fooled by that. I said, this is antisocial. This is not cool. This is really ugly behavior. And I said that to my daughters. And 99.9 to the end, to the nth nine of parents, percent of parents aren't saying that, right? So, and that was on regular TV. On the internet, it's a million times worse, right? Kids are seeing it all the time. And that's what their algorithm is going to keep feeding them, is nasty, nasty, nastiness. And so that becomes a social norm. And again, they become desensitized to it.
Yeah, and I think from a developmental perspective, it's important to point out as well that with adolescents in particular, and that's, I think, who are engaging in this trend, the flip the camera trend, at least temporarily, I think it ups their social standing. And as we know, that's one of the most important developmental tasks for teenagers, is to enhance their social standing and their identity and so on. And that, I believe, overrides their ability to, in the moment, exercise empathy and, let their morals override that need for social standing. And I mean, in their defense, their prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed yet, but that's not an excuse, right? It has to come from conversations like what you're describing and helping teenagers to take that step back and understand, like, maybe in the moment this might feel funny or whatever, but in the long term, this is harmful to you and your ability to develop empathy, and of course, to the victim of that bullying.
Exactly. And so many of these times, like I alluded to earlier, the parents of these reprobates are encouraging them because they're getting some gain as well, whether it's notoriety, whether it's the money, okay, or they're just afraid of their kids. They can't raise them properly. Okay. So children then are expecting that. And those adults, they represent authority. They represent the system. They represent the safeguards. And if those very people are the ones who are going along with it or condoning it, what lesson are kids learning? And by the way, you mentioned also, or I think the person in the video, I don't forget who mentioned about pranks. Okay. Funny, like harmless pranks can be hilarious. But some of these pranks that you see between these couples and everything like that, and I called this out almost 20 years ago in the university course. I remember because that's when they started really becoming popular, 15 to 20 years ago. And I said, these are not fun. These are two people who I think hate each other. Right. But, and this was before you could monetize these things. So they weren't even getting money for it. They were just, recording each other, humiliating themselves. And so again, you see a bunch of people thinking, oh, this is how, isn't this cute? This is how I can treat my partner with such disregard or not just callous disregard, but contempt and sometimes physical harm. Again, it was being normalized. So I called it so many years ago and it's only got worse.
Yeah. And this brings to mind then, as far as like the motivation for it right now, I think clearly surrounds like monetization and views and so on and so forth. But I think in the past, generally speaking, like when a bully was picking its victim, it would typically be somebody who maybe wasn't weak per se, but didn't have as strong a social standing, or maybe didn't have as high a likelihood of people standing up for them or people supporting them. I wonder if that is still the case. And I certainly don't have the answer. I'm thinking out loud here, but I wonder if the target of these things has changed or if there is still some semblance of that.
Oh, it's still there because you will see like they'll go after homeless people. Okay. They'll go after people who maybe, cognitively less capable. So it's either, it's either that they're going after them or they have the numbers behind them. Okay. So it might be 4 girls going after a guy and, who might be a normal guy, may not be, like the loser in the group, might be a normal person, normal status. Okay. But there's 4 of them. So they can, they can assert their dominance in that way. And what's really important when you talked about that elevation of your status, which is something that, again, it's something inherent in social animals, which we are, we want to have, we want to elevate our hierarchy. It's literally a zero-sum game. And what people don't, just to explain that to people who don't know, a zero-sum game is that your benefit has to necessarily come at another cost. The more you go up, the other thing or person goes down. So they're humiliating, shaming somebody to elevate their status. And, the higher they go, or the lower the other person goes, the higher they go. So they're trying, to really hurt and shame and humiliate the person. And again, it is sociopathic by definition. And when I said antisocial earlier, people think antisocial is shy. I mean antisocial as an antisocial personality disorder, which, as it's basically criminal behavior, criminal mind, causing harm to others without any remorse. And that's what we're seeing. And that's also the definition basically of sociopathy is that. And again, it's being normalized, it's being minimized, and it's being emulated by so many people. Anyway, it's I can go on, but I'll let you take the next step, please. Sorry.
And I have like many different trains of thought that I'm following here, but like all in all, I guess my thought is, well, like, what can be done? It's only going to get worse, I think. And it is only getting worse the more that people are like literally directly rewarded again. So not just rewarded in the sense of that increase in their social status and social standing, but like monetarily being rewarded for this type of behavior. And there's nobody discouraging it. I think that's the big, and I won't say nobody, but there's, few people discouraging it and in fact encouraging it further through these algorithms, through parents making money off of their children's accounts and so on. Like I'm really dismayed by it, to be quite honest, because like bullying obviously has always been a problem, but it's just like so inflated with this new methodology of doing it.
Yeah, and it allows for so many different or diverse ways of bullying and harming. And once again, to the harm itself, it's in perpetuity. It's there forever, potentially on the internet, and it has led. We know for a fact, numerous people have committed suicide because of this in Canada. Well, in every country, numerous people have done that. And and look. I do believe that, and some people have been held responsible. Okay, I think that any harm that comes to someone, and it doesn't have to be suicide, anything, the people should be held accountable. Okay, there should be serious repercussions, and I'm sorry, but parents should be held accountable as well. Now, if the parent can show, look, I had no clue, whatever else like that, then if the parent is forced to do everything in their power to make restitution somehow and to make sure that their child doesn't become, again, a sociopath ruling the streets, then maybe the punishment can be mitigated. But I believe that parents have to be held accountable, and schools, by the way, because schools allow this to happen as well. Now, not all schools, not all teachers, but I think you and I have talked about this before. So many people, both of us, have worked with either the victims themselves or their parents. Okay, who've tried to curb this, who've gone to the schools, and the teachers or the principals, trustees, whoever, they just throw up their hands and say, what can we do? And you can do a lot. It's your responsibility. If we are entrusting our children in this care of the school for 7 or 8 hours a day, then they have to bear some responsibility as well. And this is not about retribution. I'm not just saying, punish those people. What I'm saying is I'm hoping that with the threat of this punishment, that this will, encourage people to do the right thing, step up, because you're supposed to be the authorities. And like I said, the same with police. And there's been talk about this, okay? Because this is a new phenomenon, like with this type of, social media, craziness, that the laws haven't caught up. They have to. Mm-hmm. That's one thing. They have to have specific laws, that will really, make people held to account. And I would much rather, as much as I have this, this need for vengeance, okay, I would rather that these perpetrators, if they are shown that, maybe they show some bad judgment, maybe they got caught up in it, maybe they're actually a good person who did one stupid thing, I would rather have them have a chance to make amends, to be a good, decent person. But sitting down and talking to the person or watching a video on bullying or something, that's not it. I'm talking some real intense, work in doing right by others. Make them, volunteer at a shelter. Make them do this, this, and that. Some people say enforce, volunteering or, enforce, it backfires if done properly. If they say it's not about punishment, it's about helping you, become a decent human being, blah, blah, blah. Yes, like I said, there are going to be certain teens or young adults who, no, that they're going to go, whatever, then fine. Yeah. Then make them have punishment, make them, suffer the consequences in jail. But for everybody else who has potential to be, saved, give them that opportunity.
Yeah. So the thing is, this is what comes to mind as you're saying that. And anyone who knows me knows that I have no shortage of criticism for our school system and the problems and so on. But I will say that I think, at least in comparison to when we were kids, there is a higher degree of like acceptance of differences and like an attempt at least to be a more welcoming, warm environment, accept differences, embrace differences, and so on and so forth. So I think that in that respect, schools have tried, but clearly, it's not sticking. Or what comes to mind is perhaps then the power of this reward that students and kids, adolescents, whatever, are getting from the algorithm, from likes, from shares, from their videos being viewed. That desire has superseded any learning that they've had with regard to, enhanced learning about empathy and emotions and being more welcoming and being more open. I don't know. That's really concerning to me.
Well, and you're right. I mean, because that's more proximal. I mean, that's like it's right in front of them that they have this, this immediate reward. And it feels good because again, as social animals, we want that status, we want that validation, we want to belong, we want to be seen by others. So getting it right away certainly does supersede the empathy and going, what, I could humiliate somebody and get 1 million likes, or I could actually be a decent human being. Well, You
Yeah.
know, that, right? We many people take the wrong path. And again, especially when it's normalized so much and the person, once again, they are desensitized. It's behind a camera. It's not so bad. And look, people, this starts earlier and earlier. Like we're seeing it because the technology makes it available. So kids always bullied each other before, but now they have ways of bullying them. And we know that boys bullying was more physical historically. Girls was more through gossip, through reputation destruction, and so on. Okay, and this makes it much easier. So there's a lot of males doing the same thing. A lot of this reputation, they're taking this feminized approach, to destroying people, the reputation destruction. And then there's the males who do both, where they physically, hurt or humiliate somebody, and they spread it to make the person just lose any status at all among their peers. So it is so toxic, starting earlier, and therefore, once again, parents have to play a much more active role in trying to mitigate the this growing problem.
Yeah. Yeah. So, as far as parents and what they can do, like we've spoken before about research suggesting that social media access before the age of 16 can be problematic, again, because kids are going through puberty, they're being exposed to a lot of different things, their brains aren't fully developed, and so on and so forth. It's interesting to see that some governments across the world are now actually implementing these laws and making it so that people under 16 can't access social media legally. I think people still are and still are going to, and there are always challenges that come along with these blanket rules. But I have some hope surrounding the fact that maybe the powers that be are seeing the true harms that are occurring as a result of young people accessing social media before they have the emotional ability and intelligence and I would say impulse control to be able to handle all that is social media. So a little bit of a bright spot here. But nonetheless, I think that like so many things, the onus does largely fall on parents in terms of monitoring what their kids are doing, modeling proper behavior, not encouraging and laughing at things like this because, kids do what they see. That's a principle as old as time. And I think that the power of social media is really amplifying that. So setting that really strong example, as always, is really important.
Yeah, and another principle as old as time is that, and I don't expect people to do this. Adults don't do it. Most adults don't do it. So I certainly wouldn't expect a teen or a child to do it. Which is when bad stuff is happening, very few people would ever step up. They're not going to, because they don't want the attention directed toward them. So I don't expect someone to do right and say, hey, stop it right there. When, that's just not human nature. Human nature is to, either to stay quiet. But I would say at the very least, parents should tell their kids, don't give them unrealistic goals. Okay. Of like trying to stand up. Okay. Maybe they can, but at least don't participate. Right. Remove yourself if you can. And if you're afraid that you're removing yourself is going to be bad, try, just don't exacerbate an already bad problem, right? And and again, it's because I don't want to sound like one of these idealistic parents who say, well, that afterwards maybe you can sit down with the person. You know what, that really wasn't cool. I didn't really like that. Okay, if you can do that, great. If you can do a one-on-one or something like that, where right, you can say that. But I don't expect most people to have the wherewithal to do that, especially as kids or teens. So I'm not trying to say that. I'm just saying that the parents, even if parents say ideally that's what you would do, but I don't expect you to do that because as a social animal, you want to be part of the group. Okay. But I've told I've told my daughters, first of all, never engage, right? I say that don't ever engage. And like I said, you can kind of like, give it a weak smile if someone says something cruel about another person. Okay. I say, just don't jump in and join them. Okay.
Yeah.
And parents should be saying that at the very least. Okay. Again, don't exclude yourself. Don't cause yourself to be alienated by the group. That's not going to do anybody any good. But try your best to sort of slightly distance yourself, because at the very least, you're making yourself less susceptible to internalizing the same evil that is being, or at least malevolence that is being, promulgated. At the very least, you're kind of creating a bit of a buffer.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious what our listeners think in terms of why this trend has gained traction. Let us know in the comments what you think. Why has this trend taken off? And do you agree with what we've come up with? Do you have other ideas? Let us know.
Okay, and on that note, until next time, keep your eyes on the road and your hands upon the wheel and to yourself.